What is a concubine? We're going to review a quick video by Chris Rosenberg, and this is a fantastic little video with some good stuff and some not so good stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the mix. He does a great job of packing a lot of information into 3 minutes, something I haven't been able to figure out how to do yet. But here we go. Buckle up. All right, so we've got a video from Chris Rosenberg. I came across this the other day and thought that it was kind of a neat, short video. His video is actually 3 minutes and 53 seconds. It's going to take us a little bit longer than that to unpack some of the things he has here, but he's got some good stuff. So let's flip it over here real quick, and we will take a look at it. I'm going to expand this so we can see all of it. His video is titled, "What Does Concubine Mean? Does God Support Multiple Wives?"
All right, so what is a concubine? I mean, after all, they seem pretty prevalent in the Old Testament. Was it a wife? Was it someone for doing the nasty? Or something entirely different? We're going to talk about all that, and we're going to do it in 3 minutes coming up. All right, welcome to another 3-Minute Thursday. This week,
so I get the question often, what is a concubine? Define a concubine. And in fact, he's going to give us a somewhat okay definition here we'll discuss, but the truth is Scripture doesn't really spell it out for us, and he is honest in telling us this.
we are talking about concubines, and then we're going to end it with just an important note on concubines, because the context and the culture and all that matters, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to listen to this and just instantly get offended, as is the way that a lot of people are when they read the Bible.
It's not just about reading the Bible. There are a lot of people that love to read the Bible. It's whether or not they actually believe or process what it says. There are a lot of people that want to read the Bible and see their doctrine in it without reading it for what it actually says. Let's go.
Let's go ahead and throw 3 minutes on the clock. All right, so what is a concubine? A concubine really is a female who has a legitimate sexual partnership who is someone other than the primary wife. Now, I know what you're thinking. Like, how is it legitimate? Primary wife, sexual partnership? That doesn't even add up right.
Great point. Legitimate sexual partnership. The fact of the matter is that when a man takes a concubine, she belongs to him just as a wife or a woman. Now, he's going to explain that possibly lower status or some other things involved in that. We'll address it when we get there. But the bottom line is, Scripture never ever condemns concubinage. It was one way that a man could have or bring an additional woman or women into his household. And that could be for a number of different purposes. It's important to understand where he says, the two don't add up. How do you do that and have a legitimate partnership and have a first wife? His problem, without him ever saying it here, is that he doesn't understand the definition of adultery according to Scripture. Now, we have talked about this at great length before, but very simply, adultery can only happen when a married woman is involved. At no point ever in Scripture is a man called out for adultery, or does the Most High address adultery when a man takes more than one woman. Whether David having 7 wives and 10 concubines, it was when he took the wife of Uriah the Hittite. It was when he took the wife of another man. If you look at Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, it very clearly tells us that's where the definition is for adultery in Scripture. And until you get the definition for adultery right in your matrix or in your paradigm, you will not get anything else right with regards to the sexual laws or the marriage laws in Scripture. The foundation is to understand the definition of adultery. A single man with a single woman can't be adultery. A single man with a married woman, adultery. A married man with a single woman, not adultery. A married man with a married woman that's not his wife, adultery. David and Bathsheba as an example. The point is, a man can have more than one wife or more than one woman as long as it operates inside of the boundaries of what Most High sets in His Word with other boundaries. And concubines are protected within those boundaries.
You are correct. It doesn't. But different culture, different time. It was more acceptable then. Now we know.
All right, acceptability based on the culture. And I love Elder Kabir's clothing line that is cult, C-U-L-T. It's culture is really the way this whole thing works out. It's a mindset, it's a paradigm, it's an operating system within which the surrounding world around you operates, but we aren't necessarily in that culture. We're in it, but not of it. Maybe that's the way it should be. The point being that Scripture should define our culture as believers in what the Most High allows and disallows, what He calls righteous and what He calls unrighteous. He never calls having a concubine or having multiple wives unrighteous. What He does say is if you don't take care of them in this manner or up to these standards, then you are operating in an unrighteous manner. This is the big challenge. He's trying to define Scripture based on what his culture says, and the culture doesn't get to define what Scripture says. Instead, Scripture defines Scripture.
Know that a concubine is also a wife because the terms are sometimes intermingled throughout the Bible, right? So, for example, in Genesis chapter 25, verse 1, Abraham has a wife by the name of Keturah. But then in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 32, Keturah is referred to as a concubine. So this is very important. Recognize that the word wife doesn't exist in Scripture. It's woman. So Abraham took another woman. Her name was Keturah, okay? But he also took Sarah. Sarah was his woman. We like to attach the label wife to it, assuming that somehow that has a special merit or special significance. But there are some women that are referred to as pilagesh, or concubine. And nowhere in Scripture ever is there a clear definition of what a concubine is or how to become one. It appears that there are multiple different ways to enter into that. It could be a woman that is bought, could be a woman that could be an amorous or a romantic relationship. Now, I don't like the word romantic because it comes out of Romanism, opposed to more of the business relationship. There are a lot of men that took concubines simply because that was a way to build their house. We're going to get some great valuable information from him in just a minute on that very point. Then how do you not get to be the concubine? Like, how do you get that elevated status of primary wife? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Now, there's a theory, not historically or biblically backed, just the way we've kind of come to understand it, that a concubine is someone where there was no bride price paid. Now, bride price basically refers to how much money the man was willing to pay for that woman. In this case, it was either a lot less or none whatsoever.
He makes a good point here, and that is the fact that we don't have a clear definition of this in Scripture. The best that we can come to is surmising, theorizing based on the evidence that we have and based on other cultural markers around at that time. There's no clear evidence as to how it works, but one thing that is clear is that the man buys the woman. So a bride price for a wife, for example, Jacob's bride price for Leah and Rachel was 7 years of hard labor for each, right? 14 years of work. For those two ladies. Well, if you work that hard for two ladies, you're going to take good care of them. Each of them came with a maidservant that could also possibly be labeled as a concubine. I think later on, Bilhah is labeled as a concubine. So it would be a woman of lesser status, but still she belongs to man. In fact, all the way through Scripture, everywhere we look, always, the woman or the bride or the what we call wife is the property of the man. Now, Western civilization and Western culture utterly detests this idea, but the bottom line is the man is the head of the house. It's this way all the way through Scripture, and she is part of his house, and she is part of what he uses to build his house, to build a progeny, to build a wealth and power block. And we see this all the way through. We don't see the house of Sarah, the house of Rachel, the house of Leah. What we do see is the house of Jacob. We see the house of Judah. We see the house of Israel. We see the house of Joseph. We see the house of David. We see the house of Aaron, I think, is another one that's mentioned at one. The bottom line is the house belongs to the man, and the women are part of his house. Now, that's not a structure, but it's a figurative statement for what he is building in terms of family and wealth.
Giving her a lower status, making her not a primary wife. Yup. Now, if that's not offensive enough for some of you, there's also this question of, were they slaves or were concubines free? And there are areas of the Bible that make them appear to be slaves and areas of the Bible that make them appear to be free. So it could quite frankly be both. Now, if it helps a little bit, I will say that the word slave as defined in biblical times has a little bit different meaning than it does now. I realize.
This is very, very important. Now, he makes a good point when we talk about slave or a servant or a maidservant. Had a great discussion with a couple of the people on our Patreon just the other day. Now, if you want to have an opportunity for a lot of interaction, not just with plural families, but with other men and women who are pursuing a patriarchal lifestyle, great place to participate, both in our Telegram discussion groups and the private discussion groups, as well as in being able to communicate on the Patreon channel. I strongly recommend come take a look at Parlay with Pete Rambo, our patreon.com Parlay with Pete Rambo. You should be able to see the link right there on your screen, and it's in the description of every video. But he makes a great point that slavery at that time was very different than what we typically associate with slavery and the travesty that happened in the Western Hemisphere, as well as the ongoing travesty in parts of Africa and other parts of the world. We still have slavery, and it still exists, and the way that it exists is not good. Now, what Scripture has primarily was a means of protection. It was also a means of restitution. If somebody got into debt, now today we just declare bankruptcy and walk away and we're all free. No, back at that time, if you signed your name for something and then you couldn't pay up, then you got to go to work for whoever it was that you owed the money to. Not a bad deal. It actually would probably do a pretty good job of causing people to think twice before they go buy that new Mercedes or that new BMW or whatever that's way above and beyond the budget that they have. But slavery also was a way for people to escape poverty. Instead, they could go give themselves to, or in cases, sell themselves to a wealthy man who had good reputation and handled his house and family well. And Torah, biblical law, protected the slaves. They had lots of rights. In fact, we look, for example, at Abraham's house. He's got Eliezer, the master of the house. Eliezer belongs to Abraham, and yet here he is handling the affairs for Abraham, and Abraham was the equivalent of probably a billionaire by today's standards. He had huge holdings. I mean, he had his own private army of more than 300 and I forget what the number was, 373, 383, and something like that. Roughly 400 that he marshaled and then went on a campaign from down near Sodom, all the way up to the northern area of Damascus, which is well north of Israel. That's a long, long distance. That's a big trek. You got to fund that, and you're going to fund the operation, and then turn around and take the booty and say, nope, I don't want anything. Give it back to the people that it belongs to. That's somebody who's got some bucks, right? But here's the bottom line. Concubines, in many circumstances, not always, but in many circumstances, were regarded as maidservants or servants to the man or to the house.
Realize that does not help a lot. Moving on. So then what was the purpose of a concubine? Let's just be real. I think we know one of the reasons of having multiple wives, all right? It was because they were dirty. They were dirty, trying to do the dirty. You know what I'm saying? Just doing the dirty. And then
Well, that sells videos and gets laughs and makes friends and all kinds of things. But you know what? I would challenge him. Why does a man go get a first wife? He doesn't do it because, well, I just felt like I needed a cook. He typically does it because, she's looking good, right? God gave women curves for a reason, and he also uses a specific type of glue to bond the man and the woman together, and that doesn't happen just with good cooking. You know what I'm saying? So he can play the game here and say, oh yeah, concubines were for doing the dirty. No, he's going to give us some legitimate reasons here. But the first wife fits right in that same bill. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest, most men wouldn't put up with women except for the fact that they come with benefits, right? So this is important to understand. And, trying to write concubines off as, oh, well, they're just mistresses or they're for the man's sexual proclivities, not entirely false, but very much. That's laying entirely too much weight on one reason and not on other much more valuable reasons.
Then the second reason is because maybe the primary wife was barren, right? For example, in Genesis chapter 30, we see that Rachel is barren, and meaning she can't have kids, right? So Rachel can't have kids, so she gives Jacob her slave, again, back to the slave thing,
paid servant,
procreate and have children so that Jacob's line will continue. Speaking of kids, that's actually another reason for having concubines, because the more wives you have, theoretically, more damn kids you got running around. And the more kids you had equals the larger family, larger tribe, enhanced workforce, and better defenses.
Yes.
All of that comes along with having more people. Now,
So it's very important to understand that the Most High didn't just allow, he actually describes himself as a polygynist, describes himself as having two wives, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And he says very clearly in Ezekiel chapter 23 that those, he had those before they left Egypt. He viewed them as two wives before they left Egypt. But the Most High clearly, over and over, all the way through Scripture, uses, or men use polygyny, and the Most High is perfectly all right with it as long as it operates within certain boundaries. But men use polygyny for the purpose of building wealth, for the purpose of building strength, for the purpose of having workforce or labor on the farm. It was an agricultural or agrarian society. So concubinage is just one part of polygyny. A man could have multiple first wives, if you will, for example, or multiple primary wives, for example, Jacob with Leah and Rachel. Or you look at David, who's listed as having 7 and then later 8, one through his adultery with Uriah and then having him killed. But he had 8 wives and 10 concubines is the way, or 8 women and 10 concubines as Scripture describes it. And God says nothing. He says nothing about it. David was a man after his own heart. We see lots of places. Scripture, we cover this all the time on this channel with lots and lots of evidences, both historical and scriptural. And we demonstrate in spades that the Most High has zero problem with it. The only thing the Most High is interested in is marriage, being fruitful and multiplying, something that has never been rescinded, and the Most High wants to make sure that women are cared for properly. So there are boundaries, guardrails, regulatory commands in Scripture that say, if you're going to do it, this is how you do it, and please me. Let's hear him tap dance backwards here for a few minutes.
The thing I got to say on concubines that I think is extremely important to understand is that just because they are used throughout the Bible does not mean that God supports having multiple wives. All right, it's really important to understand as we read through the Old Testament that God uses us in the culture that we already exist.
He uses us where we are, yes, but he doesn't operate within our cultural boundaries. He has his own culture. That's the definition of his Torah. That's the definition of his word. He says, this is what pleases me. And within that, very clearly, the guidelines are there that say if you're going to have more than one wife, go to Exodus chapter 21, verse 10, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 15 through 17. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 16, 17, and 18. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 10. As well as many examples in there where, for example, you go watch my video on God, Jacob, and polygyny, and you'll find out that the Most High created the circumstances for Jacob to have 4 wives, and he caused it to happen. You'll find in my video, 5 times God calls himself a polygynist, that he doesn't have a problem with it. He actually uses it as a description or as an image of himself dealing with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And he viewed them as 2 separate brides before they left Egypt. Yeah, the Most High has no problems with it. It's Christendom, D-U-M-B. It's Greco-Romanism, and it's those things codified in the Roman Catholic doctrines that we've inherited that have a problem with it. And all of those things are false. They're contrary to the word of the Most High. And actually, the one thing that's really cool about learning and understanding about headship, patriarchy, and polygyny is that, well, this is the one subject that challenges the adversary more than any other, because we are interested in restoring the proper biblical order according to what we see in right from the beginning. God, Messiah, man, woman. It's we have the cliff notes for that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. But the bottom line is, go all the way back into the Garden of Eden, and you see that God made Adam first, made Eve from Adam, brought Eve to Adam. Adam named her. I guess God made Eve for Adam, and then Adam named her in her general characteristics, woman, and in her particular characteristics, Eve, Chava. The point being that she belonged to him. She was his helpmeet, not the other way around. They were not co-equals. They were not, there's nothing equal about them. She's there as part of him to help him accomplish his purpose. And we can see the exact same illustration with the ecclesia, sometimes called the church. It's a poor translation. It should be the assembly, referring to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. See Acts chapter 7, verse 38, where Stephen says that the assembly, the ecclesia, the Bible probably says congregation. They won't put church there because they don't want you to be confused by truth over their doctrines. But he says that the ecclesia stood at Mount Sinai. House of Israel and the house of Judah. That was the assembly. We see that image all the way through. But we see this, that the ecclesia that is bound to the Messiah doesn't get to turn his head, tell him what to do. We're not co-equals. We don't get to manipulate or anything else. And he can go get another anytime he wants. But we have only one head option. Another way to look at it is that the Messiah has a relationship with me, has a relationship with Chris, has a relationship with others, right? He has multiple relationships, multiple covenants, right? And it's described as a bride and groom relationship. But Christendom has real problems as soon as the word polygyny or polygamy come up, 2 words that are never used in Scripture, but clearly defined and clearly demonstrated to be okay as long as you operate according to ways of the Most High.
For example, I'm a sinner, right? I'm a sinner, but God will still use me in America in 2020 for his plan and his purpose. That does not mean that he supports everything that I do. It most certainly does not. I think that was over 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, you were over 3 minutes by a couple seconds. I commend you for putting that much information in a 3-minute video. I can't do it. I actually guesstimated this would be 25, and I'm at about that right now. But the point is, he gets a lot of things right, but as with most, he gets a few things wrong, and it's very important for us to straighten that out and to come back in here and have a quick discussion so that we can recognize that The Most High has no problem, does not have a problem at all. There's no place in Scripture that he has a problem with a man having more than one wife, unless he acquires that woman from another man when she's still married. If she's divorced and legitimately so and for proper reason, and that's a different conversation that we should have sometime, she can be remarried, right? We see that in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4, right? It is legitimate for her to be remarried. But Most High has rules, and the rules don't disallow, or they allow concubinage, allow additional wives, however you want to put it together. Okay? So be smart, take responsibility for yourself. Men, be men. This isn't a game. This isn't something that is like, oh goody. Instead, what you need to do is you need to evaluate really what is going on and why. Here's a question. Why did Abraham take additional? Why did Jacob take additional? Why did David have additional? Why did Gideon have additional? And Moses and Caleb, who inherited the land, and Joash and all these others. Why? Okay? In most cases, it's because they are building a house. They're building a business. They're building an industry or wealth and power block, and it's the man's option, but you need to do it for the right reasons. All right, guys. I hope that helps you out. For King and Kingdom, I bid you shalom.